Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Talking Insights, the podcast that showcases groundbreaking and innovative projects in the insights industry. And that's exactly what this season is all about, showcasing the projects that won the SMR Awards. And today we're joined by Vas Bakopoulos, the SVP Head of Industry Research for MMA Global, and also a double award winner recognized with two groundbreaking marketing projects, the Movable Middles Growth Framework, MMGF, and Brandeis Performance. Both projects tackle some of the biggest challenges in modern marketing: how to target the most responsive consumers effectively, and how to prove that brand marketing drives measurable business outcomes. Both projects are very interesting, and the conversation, it's a great way to understand the work that Vas and the team did over 5 years. Vas, welcome to the show, and congrats once again. Hi, Vas. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Talking Insights. Thanks for your time for being here, and congratulations on the two awards. It's the first time that we have the two award winner. I've been interviewing a bunch of the winners, and it's usually one, and you got two. The best data-driven marketing strategy, both gold and silver. Congrats.
We feel very privileged, very great honor, and I'm super excited to be here to tell the story.
Great. And you won these awards with two projects, the Movable Middles Growth Framework and Brandeis Performance. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I want to start with the first one. Can you explain me what inspired you to the development of the Movable Middles Growth Framework? I know it's a big sentence, the MM.
It is. Yeah, it is. It's the movable middles growth. Yeah. So this is a great question. So I think there were two important trends that we were observing, and this has been a labor of love for like many years. So one of them was that we were seeing that a lot of marketers were moving away from reach-based planning, which is a side effect and an after effect of the fact that marketing has become more data driven and more digital, right? So there's more focus on outcomes, which I think is a good thing, and we have to applaud it. But with that, a lot of targeting is a realization that a lot of targeting doesn't work, and a lot of marketers were coming back and tell us like, we're not sure if our targeting approach works, if it works all the time, and these were all questions that were coming back. And there was also the question like, am I doing too much targeting, and am I mortgaging the future of my brand? Right? So these were all questions that were coming back from our members. So when we kick off this process about 5 years ago, we said, okay, what if we could do three things? What if there was a targeting approach that could provide predictable results? Joel Rubinson, who is my partner in crime and who is actually the father of the Movable Middles, and he's been working with the MMA for a while, the way that he would put it is that, do we have an approach? Can we get to an approach that follows some math-like laws or principles, right? So that makes it predictable. The second thing is, can this approach deliver results that are consistently better than other targeting methods, both in the short term and in the long term? And can we prove that? And then the third one was, can we create a system that allows marketers to go and have repeatable success, right? So not just a one-off thing, but is that something that we can go and do again and again? So these were the three things that we were kind of aiming when we kind of kick off that approach like more than 5 years ago.
Right. I was going to ask, like, why was targeting this movable middles such a key insight for marketers? Why was it so important?
Yeah.
I know that you talked about these three pillars, but
yeah, that is actually, I'm glad you asked that, because the essence of the movable middles is that for its brand, for its category, there's a segment of people who are going to be more responsive, very responsive to your advertising, just your advertising as a specific brand. And these are the movable middles. At the same time, the flip side of that is that there is also a huge group of consumers who are completely unresponsive and should be avoided, right? So these are the two sides of that, right? And unfortunately for most brands, unresponsive consumers are the bulk of the market, right? And this is why the reason why reach-based planning sometimes, a lot of times, doesn't work, or it actually is value destructing sometimes. So let me unpack that a little bit more. If you've read a book back from the early 2000s, I think it's called The Invisible Gorilla, and it was from Christopher Sabris and Daniel Simmons, and they introduced the idea of selective attention. And you've probably seen this video where, it's kind of a mental test. They say, count how many times people will pass the ball right? And
Yeah.
then the gorilla passes by, and then you don't see the gorilla, right? The idea is that your brand could be the gorilla, right? And that's selective attention, right? Because you tune something out, right? So adding to that, the MMA, we did a huge neuroscience study back in I think in 2019, and what we did find out is that cognition of advertising takes place in milliseconds. And then one of the key factors that determines the impact of advertising is the pre-existing relationships that we have with the brand. Now, in mathematical terms, and again, I'm kind of channeling my friend Joel Rubison, he would basically tell you that responsiveness is like there's a curve like this,
Hmm.
right? And peaks when your probability of choosing a brand is 50-50. So you can go left and you can go right, right? Because at that point, you're more open to information. And
Right.
as you move away from those middles to the sides, either you go to very low probability, 0 to 20% probability, you're kind of unresponsive. It's very, very hard to penetrate your mind at that point. Or if you're over 80%, then you already know a lot about your brand. So there's no incrementality, right? So the more you move, from the 50-50 to the sides, you're becoming less responsive to advertising. So that's the main idea. The value of it is that movable middles can be a lot more responsive. And we've seen in some studies that it can be like up to 23 times more responsive compared to other groups. So targeting them has a huge benefit, both in the short term, but also in the long term. We've actually measured and did experiments over a long time. And we can actually see that targeting this group can drive short-term sales, but also penetration and long-term sales. So that's the idea.
That's fascinating. I can see why you won the award. It's a very interesting idea. And you also won an award for Brandeis Performance. And I want to talk about that one as well.
Yeah.
Because can you walk me through like the whole study design that you created for this project? Because you tracked millions of households.
Yeah.
You linked ad exposure to survey and sales data. How did this whole project come to?
Yeah. So this is another big question. And I think I probably have asked over 100 CMOs, what is your number one problem? And typically, if it's not the number one, it's number two, but it's typically makes the list is like the whole thing about brand versus performance. And that's their language, not mine, in terms of like, how do you kind of optimize and how do you kind of quantify the value of brand, right? So that was the origination of the idea. Now, in terms of the design, there are three important things that design principles, let's call them, that we try to incorporate here. And again, the goal was to find a way to increase let's call it the accountability to brand investment, right? And do that in a way that we connect brand measurement to attribution and to sales. So that was the orientation. So the first one was that we were saying brand measurement is usually siloed in tracking studies, right? Or lift studies. Each of them has their own merit, but they're usually disconnected from behavior. Right? If you think about it, you have brand tracking studies that you track for a while, and then these are spaghetti lines that sometimes never move, right? And then you try to take this aggregate data from these tracking studies, and then you try to connect them with total sales. And the modeling sometimes is not very reliable. It doesn't really get you what you want. So we thought what we needed was a solution that was based on individual level data, not on aggregate data, that would give us a lot more signal. So that was point number one. The second one was that most brand lift studies are siloed by channel, and they provide limited ability to marketers to really understand, brand outcomes across touch points during a campaign. So we asked, can we connect the three pieces here, which is like brand perception from the surveys, ad exposure data from, each touch point, and then sales data at the level of the individual. If you do that, then you can actually have the trifecta. You can see how each one of these points connect at the level of the individual and how they interact with each other. And we found by doing that, for instance, one of the things that we found is that favorability, brand favorability, however we defined it, creates an annuity of conversions that can be up to 6 times higher compared to consumers who are not favorable. And you can only do that when you can compare behavior with attitude and ad exposure, right? So this is a powerful idea, but of course it's hard to pull off because to your point, you need to pre-match survey panels and survey populations to sales data, and you need to ensure that you can track the ad exposure in your campaign and match that back to your single source. So it's kind of complicated. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little difficult.
It
But then
seems like.
finally, there was a third principle that measurement attribution is usually, if not always, short term. So if you think about it, most of our tests, and we do attribution, for instance, and they focus on campaign plus look back window, right? And we said, okay, are we missing something by doing that? And what if we could track those IDs longer over, say, another 4 6 months, right? And we actually did for longer in some cases after the end of the campaign. And when we did that, we just found out that sometimes a big chunk of the impact of the campaign, in some cases over 80%, came later. So, for instance, we just identified, and we could do that deterministically, that sometimes those people that we can call the newly minted favorables, people that you made favorables during the campaign, you can actually start seeing how they kind of start behaving after the campaign, which you have missed otherwise. So I think these were the three important design parameters if I had to choose and describe what this methodology was about.
And what about the outcomes? Because you worked with brands on this, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Like, I know that Ali, Campbell's, Kroger, they were kind of all a bit involved in this. What were some of the key outcomes for these brands?
Yeah, they were very involved, and I want to thank them publicly. I mean, it takes a village, and this is a big undertaking. So I want to thank all our friends at Ali, Campbell's, Kroger, and we're doing a study now also with AT&T that hasn't been released yet. But I think there were, let's say, 3 or 4 classes of outcomes that were transferable across the studies. I mean, obviously, each study is a little different, right? So if you're thinking about Ally's bank, so the KPI here is like opening new accounts. Compare that to Campbell's for red and white soup you buy every week. Compare that to Kroger e-commerce sales. Also, you do that every week, but it also has it's online. So each one of them was a little different, but there were 3 or 4 kind of class of outcomes that they were fairly, let's say, transferable. The first one was that favorability creates what I called earlier an annuity of conversions, right? So think of it, and I'm using this language specifically because part of what we're trying to do here is also to bridge the gap with our finance, with the finance department. So we just have to kind of find a way to kind of create common language and frameworks. So this annuity of conversions rates from 3 to 6 times if compared to the cohort of favorable. Like if you take the favorable people compared to the non-favorables, favorables were buying more and more consistently over time, 3 to 6 times, right? So in all cases, very significant, and it shows the power of building that brand favorability. So that's number one. Number two was that brand favorability is something that you can influence because, it matters, but what if you cannot influence it with advertising, right? So that would be like, okay, now what do we do about it? But actually, you can, and we saw lifts in brand favorability in all the studies, right? Of course, the size varied, but we could actually see that, okay, this is something that we can influence with marketing. Number three was that is what I said earlier. A big part of the campaign lift goes unmeasured. We focus on the short term, and then a lot of the impact comes later, right? And that we've saw that in some cases, Antonio, was like over 80%. So think about if you had to optimize your media and then you're missing 80% of the impact of the campaign, your optimization and your decisions would be very, very different because you say, okay, this is what we did and this is what drove that. But if you're missing the fact that, okay, there were more sales that came later and there were different channels and messages that drove that, then you would just make obviously very, very different decisions. Another thing, probably I lost track of, the fourth thing is that the classification of what is brand versus performance is something that it doesn't necessarily follow the buckets that we have expected. You tend to believe that video is only brand and play or search is only performance. And what we've observed is that each channel had potential for impact, both in terms of immediate sales, both in terms of brand lift, but also long-term sales and short-term sales. So there was a mix of outcomes that sometimes were surprising, and it depended on a number of they were different by campaign, by the way. And I think if I could just pick one last thing, it would be that there's a trade. I mean, there's many trade-offs that we as marketers need to do, but there's a trade-off. Let me call it acceleration versus growth. And this is the typical example of your CFO comes and says, "Listen, guys, we need to kind of hit results this quarter, and we need to kind of focus and shift our attention to that." right? And everybody has a story like that, and that's fine. And you have to do what you have to do. The only thing as a marketer that you need to be able to do is to say, I'm okay doing that, but here's a trade-off, and here's a measurable trade-off, and you need to be able to quantify what we're going to lose if we do that. And I think that was kind of one of the big outcomes we did with, for instance, with Ally, where we could actually see specifically that if you focus your strategy on audiences and channels that drive immediate conversions, you would actually have, I think 40% better results in the short term, but it will hurt your overall long-term potential and will bring that down, right? So your curve would go like this and they would flatten out, right? And I think that's important kind of evidence to have.
It's important to think about like the long-term strategy and not just the results for now, because sometimes you need the results for the long term. Now, to connect both projects, because both are evidence-based and data-driven, they work with this type of strategy. How do you see this frameworks shaping the future of market sciences? I
Right.
know that you don't have like a crystal ball, but how do you see it shaping it?
Yeah, no, definitely don't have a crystal ball. I can only speak about our intentions as a trade group who really care about that. And both of these approaches are part of our effort to help marketers to use marketing science in more practical ways. There were many sophisticated analytical approaches that we used in these cases. You can find some of that in our submissions and all that. But the bigger picture, and I think what makes these initiatives different and viable, and I think kind of hopefully repeatable, is first of all, the fact that we build consortium of marketers and measurement companies and media publishers to ensure that we have access to data resources and scale that one marketer alone wouldn't be able to do. And I think that is that spirit of collaboration that you can really attack a very difficult problem by yourself, right? So the way for us to influence the marketing and to make it more accountable and science driven is to build those consortiums. And our focus on doing that is also to be transparent. And the way that we do this is that by having marketers not just participate behind closed doors, but then publicly share case studies under their name. It's a very different thing to basically go and say, well, here was a retailer, and you don't know who it was. You don't have the story from the CMO or from the head of analytics. It's a very different thing to have that person stand on stage and open the kimono and really kind of talk about the journey and what they found and what worked and what didn't work. So I think these are the two things that I would just say that are part of our vision and our strategy and our mission to make marketing more accountable with science at the core, and do that by creating that collaboration across marketers, but also marketers working with the rest of the ecosystem.
And I believe that share of knowledge and the collaboration, as you was mentioning, it's so important these days for everyone in the industry to keep learning, to keep evolving. Otherwise, they'll just keep doing the same thing forever and be
Otherwise,
surpassed
exactly.
by something.
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, we have a saying here at the MMA that sometimes we're all too busy to do better. Right.
Yeah.
And I think this is exactly what we're trying to do. And we as a trade group have the luxury maybe to do that and to say, we're going to spend 2 or 3 years developing a new methodology. We're going to spend another year trying to kind of create a consortium of marketers to kind of work with us. And then it's one of these BAP studies was a year long. So it's not easy, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why, we started in 2019 and we got the award from SMI in 2025.
Yeah.
But we do
Yeah.
believe that this is how change it happens. And I think there is a flywheel effect that once you start doing that, you kind of start influencing others to do the same thing as well.
And it's also kind of a changing of mindset, because if
Right.
the world nowadays, it's always like go, 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 go. If you
Right.
don't stop for a minute and just reassess and
Exactly.
reevaluate the strategy, it's just going to be keep doing, as you
You
were
get,
saying, like you just keep
yeah.
doing.
We're all like busy, 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 busy. The little thing on the wheel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanna end by asking you that we always ask this, and it's for advice, because we have like so many people listening, from
Yeah.
people that are just fresh out of college to the CEOs of big
Mm.
brands. An advice that you can give to marketers and for all these people that are listening, not only on how to adopt these movable middles principles, but also like an advice in general for everyone.
Yeah. So let me see. I mean, I can start with the Movable Mills, the one of those two programs, and I can just say that specifically for that, I mean, it's very practical, and you have to be, practical as you're thinking about deploying it. You have to start by trying to identify what is the best way to find people and to group people into movable mills versus non-movable mills. There's a couple of ways of doing that, and depends on the product category. But when I was talking before about the probability of selecting a brand, that is how we define it. But you need some data to kind of help you classify people, predict that probability. So you need to get to that. Then you need to, probably before running a whole campaign, you need to kind of do your own post hoc analysis of, say, okay, now I have a model that predicts with a movable middle. Let me kind of go and overlay that to a past campaign and do a post hoc analysis to see, what is my accuracy of classifying consumers, and do I see the observed lift? And then finally, although you can apply movable middles across multiple channels, it's always a good idea to start small and start with a highly addressable channel that gives you more flexibility to define and target audiences. So I would just focus on those things for movable mills. Obviously, if you're an MMA member, you have access to those resources. I think some of them are publicly available as well. But obviously, as an MMA member, we will offer you coaching as well in doing that. So that's the shortest thing, the small thing about movable mills specifically. But overall, I think the advice that I would have is that taking the time sometimes to do it better and to focus on evidence and to focus on the science is the right thing to do. And a lot of times, jokingly, we joke sometimes that for every hard problem, there's an answer and there's a solution that is simple, accessible, and wrong. And if you follow that, you're not, to your point, I mean, you're not gonna progress. You're gonna kind of keep repeating what you're doing. So I think marketing is a wonderful space, and a wonderful, creative and quantitative, and the only way for us to make it better is to make it more accountable in terms of like the measurement and proving the results, and that would allow us to also kind of have a seat at the table when it comes to how marketing kind of collaborates with finance and with the other departments. So I would just say, to the extent possible, focus on rigor, focus on science as much as possible, and go from there.
Vas, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
your
Antonio. Yeah,
projects.
thank you
Congratulations
thank you so
on the
much.
awards.
Yeah, it's been a great honor, and a journey of love for a lot of us. There's so many people I want to thank from the MMA side and from all our partners. But thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell the story.
Of course. Well, thank you very much. And that's all for today, folks. Talking Insights is a production of Research World and SMR, bringing you the stories, voices, and ideas shaping the insights community around the world. If you'd like to be featured in a future episode, share your story, or learn more about sponsoring opportunities, send us an email at podcast@smr.org. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And join us next week for another great conversation. See ya.